shy, are they? No one's excited?
Not further again.
It was actually snowy here. We volunteered some of you blokes to get up there. So we were actually snowy rolled this So they're all about building art at the moment. So most of them have been AWOL before, so you've got the AWOL I believe, or was I wrong with that one? That's a slice show. Yes. Send it to your thumb drive. Yeah, I'll certainly chase it up after this. Yes. Most certainly. Remind me again. But I'm the company. I'm full of good intentions, but I'm a gunner. Sorry to interrupt. No, obviously. So just stay in touch with me.
Sorry to interrupt. Saying as a soldier, it's probably fun to see locations beautiful.
You're running the show, mate. You're the boss.
Come back and say sorry.
I don't know enough to say. No, well, we just have to say it. We should see the screen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, no worries. We didn't tend to have a mini briefing, folks, and I must apologise for that, so I'm going to actually try and rush one in here now. I'll just ask everyone to take their seats if they can, and just to relay a few housekeeping rules. With regards to people laying poppies, perhaps you've already received your instructions to be seated to my left, which is to your right-hand side there. As you may know, the list will be in alphabetical order, so I'm sure my offsider has appraised you of the situation. No worries at all, mate. Thank you. During the poppy laying ceremony, I've instructed the veterans that if they recognise a name and it's a name they wish to lay a poppy for, and you are the person to lay that poppy, just be aware, I just want the veterans to raise their hand if they wish to lay a poppy for that particular person, and we'll just instruct the person who was due to lay the poppy to hold back, and we'll allow that veteran to lay that poppy. So it more or less flow as we move along. So essentially, gentlemen, those from 2nd, 33rd, again, if you wish to lay a poppy at any time during the poppy laying service, it's simply a matter of raising your hand and attract the attention of either Jeffrey or Matt or myself, and we'll facilitate you laying the poppy. So that's not a problem from there. Also, gentlemen, at any time during the ceremony, if you wish to say any words, same thing, simply raise your hand and we'll actually bring a microphone to you. These fine people here have come here to hear you, not to hear me. So again, feel free at any time to raise your hand and we'll pass the microphone to yourselves. We're just about to start at any moment, so folks, I'll just get everyone else, once they get seated, to... Mark Gorn, are you here, Mark? Nick Anderson and Harold Jackson. Nick Anderson's from the Army History Unit.
Oh,
Thanks.
Well done, thank you.
How many are we? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 7. Yeah. Turn the lights down. Joan insisted on putting, the reunion things in the newspapers. We sent one to the Telegraph. We don't know whether they got in. We didn't see every day's Telegraph anyway, but the one to the Herald got in. As a result of that, I've had 3 phone calls. The last one was out the door just now. But one from was Keith Knudsen, if you remember, Wolf Knudsen, of course. One was from his son, and one to take it, we got him to call me at home.
We're just waiting, folks, for the rest of the people to take their seats and we'll commence very shortly.
We got one from Brisbane. Yeah. Yes. Probably looking at me and that.
No, I know, but it's such an important occasion.
It is. Oh, this one.
To me it is anyway.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it.
At least we now can give them what they deserve.
Gary. Yes. Could you ask Ernie and Beverly
Folks, would Ernie and Beverly Caife be present at the moment? Just I had a request for you to identify yourselves over here, that's all. So, on behalf of Snowy, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gary Trainer. I'll be your MC this morning. And it is indeed a pleasure and an honour for me to be standing here before you and before these veterans here of the 2nd 33rd Australian Infantry Battalion, 25th Brigade, 7th Division, AIF. I would like to formally acknowledge the veterans we have here in our crowd. Whilst most of them wish to take a backward step and not be pushed to the front, this is your day today, gentlemen. It's a day where we remember your comrades, and again, it's indeed a pleasure for me to be here with you. It's an honour I don't take very lightly at all. If I can just have you acknowledged by simply raising your hand for the crowd, I'd like to welcome Ray Gibson, Arthur Firth, military medal winner, Curly Collins, Curly's over here to my left, Doug Pleece. There's Doug hiding in the middle. Thank you, Doug. Les Thompson. Jerry Kennedy. Jerry hiding up the back. Snowy King. Murray Sweetapple. Jim Gowing. He's up the very back. Is there anyone else who I haven't mentioned? Ron Bean. Can you just raise your hand, please, Ron? Thank you. Welcome for today. Noel Reid. There's Noel. Hello, Noel. Is there anyone else? Fine. Okay, folks, just to explain a bit about myself, I'm an assistant curator here at the Australian War Memorial. My interest in the 2nd 33rd Battalion ties in with my interest in the Kokoda Trail and its history. Generally, 1942 Pacific history is my main interest. This whole function was created perhaps 18 months ago when I received an email from a chap by the name of Matt Sloan, who you'll meet later on, and we find ourselves here today as a result of that. It was our intent to host this day in Papua New Guinea in an attempt to lay a plaque, but I'll speak about that towards the end of today's presentation. I'd like to welcome, if I can, Jeff Watkins, who is the son of one of the original members of the 2nd 33rd Battalion. If Jeff could come forward here now. And he'll speak to you briefly. But during the service, if at any time any of the veterans wish to say any words, we have 2 microphones here, and we can bring the microphone to you. You may wish not to say anything, and that's fine, but simply it's a matter of raising your hand and we'll accommodate that. So I'd like you to welcome Jeffrey Watkins.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be amongst veterans, friends and family of the 2nd 33rd. And Gary's asked me to give a short talk, has to be short because he wants to talk a lot later on, about my dad, who was an original member of the 2nd 33rd Battalion. He joined the army in 1939, October 1939 in Melbourne. And being a Victorian, I feel a little bit out of place here because mainly the battalion was made up of New South Wales guys. I have a mate who lives in New South Wales who once told me that New South Wales is God's own country. Well, I said, well, that may be right, but I know he goes to Victoria for his holidays. My dad sailed out of Melbourne in May of 1940, ostensibly to go to the Middle East. He was part of the 17th Brigade of the 6th Division. When they left Puckapunyal Army Camp, they were told, given 1 day's notice, that they were going to leave the next day to go overseas. And they said, because troop movements in wartime are secret, don't tell anyone. When they arrived at Port Melbourne, there were 23,000 people there to wave them goodbye. I asked my dad, were your family there? And he said, yeah, they were there. I said, how did they know? He said, someone else told them. They sailed away, they got into the mid-Indian Ocean, and all of a sudden they took a turn to the left. They headed southwest instead of northwest. Apparently Italy had come into the war, and going up to the coast of Africa into the Mediterranean was not a good option because the Italians had airfields in that area. So they didn't know where they were going. Rumours went around the ship and they were eventually told they were going to England to bolster the English because France was in a bit of a problem. They got to South Africa. They'd been on a ship for a while. They docked in South Africa and the officers told them they could have 2 hours leave. 2 hours leave was not conducive to having a good time. So the men decided, well, we've got to have more than 2 hours. The next morning, the NCOs lined them up on the dock, marched them out the front gate, and there were at least 100 cars waiting outside the front gate driven by local women. They all piled into the cars and they took off and had a great time in Cape Town. I asked my dad, did he go? He said, I can't remember. I got out his official service record, and it says here, on the 29th of May, AWL 10 hours, fined £2, forfeit 1 day's pay. I suppose £2 is a fair bit of money in those days, but apparently the whole of the battalion, everyone that went, got fined. Anyway, they sailed off from there. They went up to Sierra Leone. They went up to Scotland, got a train down to the Salisbury Plain to a place called Tidworth, where the army camp was. My dad couldn't understand one thing about England, about the army camps. They were all next to an aerodrome, bombers and fighters. So whenever the Germans came over, they came over near the army camp, and there were many times when the bombs were falling around them. The 2nd 33rd had the dubious honour of suffering their first casualty in England. In June of 1940, they were out on a route march when a German plane came down and decided it was a good opportunity to strafe the column. They all hit the deck. My dad was near a guy named Johnny Beck. Johnny Beck received a flesh wound from this plane, and that was the first casualty of the 2nd 33rd. And he's actually the second casualty of the 2nd AIF in World War II. He enjoyed his stay in England. They had a little pub nearby, which the boys used to frequent as their watering hole. And on one occasion, a barrel of beer went missing from the pub, and the local publican and the copper turned up the army camp, found the barrel of beer, and the whole battalion got fined. No one owned up. I think it was a case of you look after your mates, you don't dob in your mates. So everybody got fined. On another occasion, a pig went missing from a local farm. It was donated to the sergeant's mess, who cooked up roast pork for the officers, and they were enjoying a meal when the farmer and the local copper turned up again. My dad said that local copper actually became a best friend of the battalion, probably for all the wrong reasons. The battalion formed in England and became the 25th Brigade, the 2nd, 31st, 32nd and 33rd Battalion. The 2nd 33rd was made up of 4 rifle companies, and my dad was in C Company. Once the threat of invasion from the Germans subsided, they were shipped off to North Africa to bolster the troops in North Africa. But the battalion was basically in reserve in North Africa, and they were stationed in various spots there in a place called Moresby. And then a little bit later on, there was a bit of a drama in Syria, and the hierarchy decided we need to move the division across to Syria because the Germans were looking like using airfields in Syria, and Syria was occupied by the Vichy French. So they went across there and they engaged the Vichy French there, which was mainly formed from Foreign Legion. And my dad said they were tough fighters, and there was a 6-week campaign which not a lot is known about back here in Australia. And although they fought there, they became known as the Silent Seventh, because most of the publicity at that time was derived around the lads that were at Tobruk. But they fought hard and fought well, and they lost men in Syria. They then came back to Australia because Mr. Curtin decided that we needed them back here because the Japanese were becoming menacing. Much to the disgust of Winston Churchill, but apparently he got told in true Australian style that the lads were coming home to defend Australia. They came out when they got back to Fremantle in early 1942. Not a lot is known about it. There's actually a battle fort on the Australian mainland. No one seems to know about it, but when they docked, the boys had been away for nearly 2 years, and they were expecting to be embraced by the local female company. When they got there, they found that the American fleet was in port. And the ladies seemed to be preoccupied with the Americans, but they seemed to have a bit of cash splashing about. The peace lasted 24 hours before it erupted, and it was a series of rolling brawls throughout Fremantle. In the foot soldiers, there is an account of some 100 Australians had to report to the sick bay for various forms of treatment. There are no records of the American casualties on that. I'm not sure, with reference to yourself, whether that's out of embarrassment or not, but apparently we came out on top. They were moved across to South Australia, did some more training, and he went up to Queensland for some more jungle training. Then they were shipped up to New Guinea in 1942. In September 1942, they landed at Port Moresby, and within a day or so, they headed for the Kokoda track. I think we all know about the Kokoda track, and I was fortunate enough to go up there last year, and my God, it was a real experience. There were times when I thought I couldn't go on, so how these guys got on in 1942 amidst the mud and the rain and the malaria and the scrub typhus and the dysentery, it actually speaks volumes for what they were able to achieve, and notwithstanding someone else trying to shoot you. It was a real experience. And my dad went up the trail, and he got up as far as Gona before he got seriously wounded and effectively ended his war. When I came back, I talked to my dad about that, and he said, oh, the going was pretty tough sometimes. And according to the records, it rained on 72 days out of 75 days that he was up there. And it doesn't rain in New Guinea. It's absolutely torrential stuff. And we copped it a couple of times while we were up there. But I talked to him about a place called Ishirawa. And I showed him some photos, and he said, oh yeah, we went through there. And the government put up this memorial there now. It's got 4 granite pillars, and it's got 4 words on each one. And I talked to him about it. I said, first one's got courage on it. I said, yeah, well, you needed courage to be up there. The second one was endurance. And he said, everybody had endurance up there. And the third one was sacrifice. And he said, there was plenty of that went on. And the fourth one was mateship. And he said that a mateship was the most important of those 4 words, because he said, for you to survive in New Guinea, you had to have mates. They were there beside you when the going got tough. They were there beside you when things weren't going the right way for you. And he said, without that, you wouldn't survive in New Guinea in 1942. So basically that covers my dad's story. And he was a proud member of the 2nd 33rd, and he was an original member. And now there's only one original member left, and that is Murray Sweetapple. He was there at the start, and he's still here. So I'd just like to acknowledge him in the context of the battalion. So he's the one remaining soul from our great battalion. Thank you.
Just in case any other veterans are hiding, some of you will have photos coming up on the screen and some won't, so don't all feel too embarrassed. And I apologise to my American companion here for the content of that last talk. You are quite welcome here. Folks, I'm going to run through a series of slides and an explanation of the fatal crash which took place on the 7th of September 1943. But before we go any further, I'll just bring up a few slides showing men from the battalion. This particular photo here was supplied to us by Elaine Lucas, who is present here today, and Private Francis McFadden. Whoops, my apologies. Is that little fella just there? Now, I'm not too sure what company this is. If any of the veterans have any idea or recognise their own faces in that, can you please indicate? Sorry, gents, it's a bit hard when you've got to swing around, isn't it, Les?
Yeah.
Would anyone have any ideas what company that may be?
No. I don't think it's a company.
It's another one of those mysteries perhaps can be sold later on.
Cox, is it?
Yeah, it looks a bit like sea company to me.
And folks, when we have occasions like this, often photos lay hidden in drawers and cupboards for years on end. This is a great opportunity. If you do have any photographs at home, Perhaps you may have some that you may wish to share with other descendants. I come from a family where unfortunately there's very few photos of our ancestors. So again, if you get prompted today to dig through those drawers and cabinets and find some photos, perhaps myself, Jeff or young Matt Sloan could be used as a central point to share those photos with other battalion members. And of course, Yvonne Unit is amongst us here, who's the secretary. Perhaps we can facilitate that. So when you see the boys all bright and shiny and clean for a photo, this is a similar group of 2nd 33rd Battalion on Iribiwa Ridge in Papua New Guinea, on the Kokoda Trail, of course. 3 of these men would lose their lives as a result of this crash. They are Joe Mackerel, which is this gentleman here, Bruce Stanton, which is this gentleman here, and Reg Ward, who is here. So again, Iribiwa was the place where the 2nd 33rd first advanced and were then ordered to come back to Imita Ridge. There they dug in, and from there they were the hold of the Japanese. Well, the Japanese didn't advance any further past Iribiwa, and the 2nd 33rd then began their advance forward, which would end roundabout north of Templeton's Crossing and then finish eventually in Gona. Here is a photo of the 2nd 33rd Battalion crossing a log bridge at Brown River. Now, Brown River is just south of Minari, so it's getting towards the middle part of the Kokoda Trail. Just to point out from there, there was many river crossings, and crossing a river fully laden with equipment was a very dangerous venture in itself. But the 2nd 33rd were advancing now, and they weren't to meet their first serious Japanese resistance until they got to a place called Bamboo Ridge, also known as Myola Ridge. This photograph was taken on the 6th of September 1943. This was the day that the 2nd 33rd Battalion, in fact the whole 7th Division, was to launch their airborne assault towards Lae. But of course, due to weather, this actual airlift was cancelled and was postponed to the following day, which of course is the fateful day, 7th September. All of the men, my apologies, all of the men that you see here lost their lives on that particular day. They are from left to right: Arthur Stew, Basil Slade, Roy Bird, Rex Devonport. That man is unknown, and the man to the front with a cigarette in his mouth is Edward Hughes. What we see here before us is a B-24D Liberator. This is the aircraft type of which Pride of the Cornhuskers was, and it was an aircraft, a heavy bomber flown by the United States Army Air Force during 1943. Of course, its compatriot was the B-17, which was a much more well-known aircraft, the Flying Fortress. But the B-24 had a Davis wing. It was designed for high-altitude bombing, and I'll speculate a little bit later on as to what we believe could have been the cause of the accident, but of course there was 2 official reports on the accident itself, one by the Americans and one by the Australians. This slide here gives you an indication of how big the aircraft is. Of course, you can see all Americans standing on the wings there, and it puts things into perspective as to how large the aircraft was. The aircraft itself was manufactured in the United States of America, and the cost of each aircraft was $297,000 US in 1943. This particular aircraft, prior to the Cornhuskers, was carrying 2,800 litres of fuel, 2,800 gallons of fuel, and 4 500-pound bombs. Its normal bomb load was 12 500-pound bombs. On this particular mission, it was to do a reconnaissance over Rabaul and then return to Papua New Guinea, hence the light bomb load, yet the full fuel load. This is the only photo we have of the crew of Pride of the Cornhuskers. This photograph was taken back in America during training, so the aircraft you see behind them is not the subject aircraft. What we have here is a 1943 aerial photograph of the 7 Mile Strip, also known as Jackson's Airfield. It was named Jackson's Airfield after the fall of Captain John Jackson, Squadron Leader John Jackson, who flew 75 Squadron Kitty Hawks during the early stages of the defence of Port Moresby in April 1942. You can see the upper strip is a bomber strip. However, on the occasion of the 7th September, Pride of the Cornhuskers took off from this lower strip, which is generally classed as a fighter strip, so it's slightly smaller. It is surfaced with a steel substance called PSP, or perforated steel planking, also known as Marsden matting. So it's a series of interlocking steel sheets which form a rigid surface, originally designed for beach landings, but of course used for Air Force activity in Papua New Guinea and other islands. This here is a modern photo of the same area. This red dot here symbolises the start point of Pride of the Cornhuskers. This red point here indicates Durran's marshalling yard, which I'll speak about today. You may note that in between the end of the airstrip here and Durran's marshalling yard here is a creek line and a small valley. This photograph here is of Durran's airstrip, or Durran's drome. To give you an idea of why these things were named as they were, the troops were to board trucks at a marshalling area and then head to an airfield for embarkation to Tsili. From there they'd go to Nadzab and then commence their attack upon Lae. So this airfield, being called Durran's, subsequently ended up being Durran's marshalling yard back at the end of 7 Mile Strip. So if that gives you a bit of an idea as to why Durran's is called Durran's. Their journey was to be roughly 10 kilometres from that point at Durran's marshalling yard to Durran's Strip itself, which is to the northwest of 7 Mile Strip. This is us in 2012. We spent extensive periods of time trying to find this strip. In fact, more time walking around than we did actually searching the ground. Quite a hot environment, and of course it's not well marked. We're talking about an area now which is not inhabited by anybody, and of course it's gone back to its original scrubland, so of course there's no monuments, roads or otherwise which would indicate to us which was Durran's marshalling yard. This is a close-up now of the general area. As you can see, this is the end of the airstrip of which Pride of the Cornhuskers took off from. There was a row of trees along this ridge line here, so this is high ground along there. This here is a valley, of which at the bottom of the valley is a creek line, and on the other side of the creek is Durran's marshalling yard. This is the type of vehicle that the men of the 2nd 33rd Battalion were boarding. It's a 3-tonne Chevrolet truck, of which we have 2 in our collection. Once you leave here, there is actually one on display, which is in the courtyard near the section for Greece and Crete. So if you look for the Middle East section of the Second World War galleries, there is a truck of this type on display. This is the end of 7 Mile Strip, looking from the pilot's perspective. So the tree line that you see here is the tree line that was first collided with by the bomber upon takeoff. So on the other side of that tree line is that valley which I explained about before with the creek line, and of course Durran's marshalling yard. What we have here is a photograph taken in 1943 after the crash, and this is looking from Durran's towards the flight path. So the B-24 would come over this rise here. It struck a tree on the crest of that ridge line, and of course struck these 2 trees here, nominated as 3 and 4 in the official report. Once it struck tree nominated number 3, the left wing sheared off and the aircraft came to ground. This is a photograph looking back towards Durran's from the direction of flight. So you can see from this point here, this tree here is the one in which the aircraft collided with, and of course it has impacted on the other side of the valley, the small valley, to a point here nominated by the main craters. It was at this point here that 2 of the 500-pound bombs exploded upon impact, and shortly after a 3rd bomb exploded. The 4th bomb failed to explode, and several men of the 2nd 33rd Battalion could tell you stories about that particular bomb.
That landed in between our trucks. The bomb landed in between our trucks. We were sitting on the trucks and we heard the blast from behind us,
just saw a big ball of fire. Thank you.
So, Snowy, do you say something?
That fourth bomb was the first thing that I saw as I jumped out of the back of the truck. I was in the corner made by the tailgate and the side of the truck. I leapt over the side as that fourth bomb rolled to a stop against the rear wheel of the truck.
This is a photograph taken in October 2012, which shows the rough area now as it looks. It hasn't changed a great deal since 1943. Again, we are looking from the direction of Durran's marshalling yard back towards the ridge line, so the aircraft would be coming towards us. This here is the only remaining major relic at the crash site, and it was this object here which allowed us to identify Durran's as being the point of impact. In fact, two of my colleagues, which are hiding in the corner here, decided to tell us that they saw this probably about 5 minutes as we marched up another hill looking for the site itself, when one of them said, "I think I saw something rusty back there." So we trudged back and actually found this particular item. I believe it comes from this vehicle here, which is the vehicle that contained Captain John Boyd Ferguson at the head of D Company on that morning of the 7th September. As you can see, we have a truck which is laying on its side, the chassis of which is, the cabin of which is partially detached from the chassis itself. This rough mud map, and you must excuse the drawing was done at the last moment, but it's just to give you an idea of the B-24 travelling towards Durran's. This is the first tree line which it struck on the top of the ridge. And these two trees are the trees that you often read about in the official histories. Of course, this tree here is the one that was marked 3 in the previous photographs. And I did this on purpose to illustrate to you that the explosion, the crater formed by the first 2 bombs exploding, more or less the full force of the explosion impacted upon the truck being occupied by Captain Ferguson. So you can see a line of trucks here, and this vehicle, of course, with Ferguson on board, is laying on its side, which again is that photograph there. If I can just read to you an account, it was witnessed by Corporal O'Brien of the 3rd Australian Divisional Provo Company in terms of the aircraft coming overhead and as to how low it was flying. On the morning of 7th September 1943, I was on convoy duty. At approximately 4:30 hours in the morning, convoy was halted at the top end of Jackson's Drome, facing the Drome. So these guys are at the very end of the strip. I was at the head of the convoy, which consisted of 18 vehicles. I heard the roar of motors of the plane as it came down the strip. I looked down the strip but could not see at first any airplane. After a few seconds, I noticed a fire which outlined the place the engine was coming towards me. The fire appeared to be in the cowling of the engine. I glanced back along the convoy, and when I looked again, the plane was passing overhead. I noticed it was a Liberator, and that the fire was in an engine on the port side of the plane. I estimate that the height of the plane was approximately 30 feet. The breeze from the plane blew the hats of some of the men in the trucks. The convoy started to move off and had travelled about 50 yards when I heard the sound of 2 almost simultaneous explosions come from the direction of the marshalling area. I looked back and noticed a glow in the sky. This is Jeffrey Watkins near that particular cabin of the vehicle. As you can see, it's quite a small cabin, just enough room for 2 men. Behind him is that valley, and what is most notable about this crash is that once the aircraft broke apart and all the fuel, we're talking 2,800 gallons of fuel, spilt out onto the ground, the topography of the ground is such that the valleys formed rivers of fire. This shot here is a shot of truck number 1, the one contained Captain Ferguson, and the vehicle behind that, truck number 2. So as you saw from that previous drawing, the vehicles were in single file. And just behind these vehicles here, in that area there, is Ward's marshalling area. Of course, the vehicles in Ward's were due to go to Ward's aerodrome. And only moments before the crash, those 18 vehicles had moved off. So had that convoy not left that scene, the death rate may have been higher, because the force of the explosion carried on in towards that tree line there. This vehicle is vehicle or truck number 3. As you can see, it too is completely burnt out. So again, the vehicles behind Ferguson's vehicle were all D Company. However, interviews with some of the veterans indicate that there was a mixture of some of the men. Some from C Company were in other trucks, and 1 or 2 from B Company also found themselves mixed up in the vehicles. This vehicle here is truck number 4, and it is the lowest vehicle. It's furthest down the hill. As you can see, the front tyres are inflated. However, the rear of the truck has had some form of an impact. So when the aircraft has struck the ground, of course, being a 4-engine bomber, articles or parts of the aircraft have gone in all directions. So it was a lottery as to whether or not your truck was hit by falling debris. This is just another shot showing the downhill slope. Of course, here's truck number 3, and truck number 4 is furthest down the hill. It's the one I just showed you previously. This scene here is looking from Ward's back towards Durran's. So of course Ward's marshalling area is in the foreground here. You can see the trucks, which is Durran's marshalling yard, and of course in the rear is that ridge line which leads towards the airfield. We found quite a fair bit of evidence at the scene to indicate that we were in fact in the right place apart from that truck. And some of those items are here this morning in this cabinet in front of me. That is a portion of a 36M hand grenade. I don't know whether Snowy might want to elaborate on this in terms of the equipment being carried by the troops. Would you like to explain in terms of your webbing?
Well, generally, riflemen, and I was one of those, had 2 what were known as basic pouches in the front, and in those basic pouches, most of us, I think, had 2 full Bren magazines, 28 rounds in each. My recollection as of yesterday was that I had 1 2-inch mortar bomb. I think since then I've read or heard that I might have had 2 2-inch mortar bombs. Then we had bandoliers of 303 ammunition, fabric bandoliers that most of us had strung from side to side over one shoulder or the other. Most of us carried 2. I think the issue may have been 1, but there were various things that you took more of if you could get more of, and especially that applied to grenades, where the old-timers would say, mate, take 6, where the issue was 2, because grenades could get you out of all sorts of trouble. And I think I might have had 4, and I think most of those fellas who died in that terrible disaster probably had more than the issue too. They were the things that could have exploded and caused death very quickly in those. You can imagine with the flaming aviation gasoline everywhere that nobody could last very long. No, I think it's on, mate.
Okay. I was in 13th Platoon C Company, and I was 2 trucks behind where the plane crashed. But the interesting thing to me was that you could, as you were sitting there all half asleep and half awake, you could see these headlights of the plane coming at you. And you were thinking to yourself, is he going to go off? Is he going to go off? Or is he going to hit us? And of course, next thing we knew, he hit us. And he threw the fuel. I reckon it went 100 feet in the air. The fuel went when his plane hit the trucks. It just went woof right over the top. And it was amazing how anyone got out of it alive. That was my feelings just seeing it there. Thank you.
Just to put things into perspective, the tankers that you see travelling on a public street now, the large petrol tankers, take around about 30,000 gallons of fuel. Well, the B-24 in question was carrying 10,800 gallons of fuel, roughly 1/3 of a modern tanker that you see driving around on our streets, which is a hell of a lot of fuel. So when you put it in that perspective, for those of you who have seen our 4-engined Lancaster bomber, G for George, which is in Anzac Hall, we're talking an aircraft of that magnitude fueled up with 1/3 of a tanker of fuel. So the whole area simply became a fireball, and that seems to be the general memory of most veterans on that particular morning. Again, we have further fragments. These here are 303 bullets. Of course, the Australians, the standard weapon at the time was a Lienfield SMLE rifle, and the Bren gun as well carried the same type of a cartridge. As you can see here, the cartridges have all ruptured due to fire. That is the base of the same cartridges, and you can see that the hollow section at the bottom is where a primer would normally go. Now, a primer is just a small charge, which of course ignites the powder inside the cartridge. As I pointed out to my comrades on that particular day, every time we picked up an article such as this, the tragedy of it is that with every bullet or every fragment of grenade that we picked up, that was possibly a life, or at the very least, a serious injury. So again, these articles that you see here before us are very sad and poignant articles, because they certainly relate to some of the men that we're going to be speaking about later on when we do that poppy ceremony. This is a slide here of Jack Mansell Balfour Ogilvie. I'm going to invite now young Matt Sloan to come forward and explain a little bit about Jack.
Thanks, Gary. My name's Matthew Sloan. I'm Jack Balfour Ogilvie's grandson. Bit of a backstory with Jack was he was an original 2nd 33rder. He enlisted in 1940, went off to England. When they were in Syria, he was, I believe, a platoon sergeant at the time. Their lieutenant was killed in action, so Jack assumed unquestioned command of his company. Before the end of Syria, he was actually one of the first 2 Australian soldiers to receive a battlefield commission. So it was Jack and a member of the 2nd 31st were both promoted to become lieutenants. The reason that Jack, I guess, plays a significant part in this is because this is a large portion of how I've been in contact with Gary, and also how they found the site last year. With Jack at the time, like I said, he was a 2nd 33rder. He was commanding 17 platoon D company at the time. Now, on the date of the accident, he was actually LOB, left out of battle. So he was working in conjunction with Captain Cox in the coordination of the men. So he was on motorbike at the time, riding between the truck line and the marshalling points, the lean-tos. At the time of the accident, he was actually with Captain Cox, and he was away from the truck line. He was on elevated ground, so he basically saw the whole thing unravel. At the time, he basically jumped straight back on the bike, went straight back down to the crash site. Captain Cox got straight onto the phone, rang fire trucks. They arrived within 5 minutes. There was a fire truck that arrived with 2 US personnel on board, dressed in asbestos suits. The 2 US personnel got straight out of the truck and went marching straight into the fire. Didn't even hesitate, did nothing, just straight in they went. Now, unfortunately for Jack at the time, he was probably one of the highest ranking officers still left on the ground at that time. So for approximately the next 3 hours, he had the grim self-appointed task of recovering the body parts of his men from the US firefighters and actually laying them out for identification. I think it was probably several hours after the accident, Brigadier Doherty arrived. Now, Brigadier Doherty was the 21st Brigade Brigadier. Now, he was actually the highest ranking officer in Port Moresby at the time. So he arrived, there were 2 captains still remaining and 3 lieutenants, and he put it to the men and said, you know, due to the magnitude, do we continue, you know, do we hold off, do we go another day? He said to the men, do we continue? The 5 officers there said, yes, sir. So without hesitation, no time for grieving, later that afternoon they still boarded their planes and they still went into battle. So that's basically how Jack, I guess, plays a part. Now, for me growing up, I'm 33. Jack died in September 1980. So I was born in January, so I only had 10 months with my grandfather. He obviously got to meet me. I don't remember anything about him. He is definitely one of my heroes from the research that I've been doing. Now, all I was basically armed with was a copy of the Foot Soldiers, and unfortunately he never spoke about his war service, so he never spoke to my mum. It's on my mum's side. Never spoke to mum about it. My grandma had since, I guess, got Alzheimer's and passed away, so I had no other contacts. So from there, it was a case of reading the Foot Soldiers. Mum had mentioned something about, look, there was an accident in New Guinea. I don't know anything about it, but I know that it stayed with Jack for the rest of his life. So what happened from there, I basically started a bit of a hunt on the internet, knew that Gary did the Kokoda treks. We started speaking, put some posts up on different forums. I've actually been in contact with 2 of the nephews in the United States who had their uncles on board the plane at the time. So from there, it's just been an exchange of information. So that's where I was able to obtain photos of the men. I got the US side of the reports. And like they said, you know, we'd always looked at the Australian side. We'd never even thought that there would have been a US investigation and that side of things. And they said exactly the same to me. When I sent them the Australian reports, they said to me, oh my gosh, like we never, you know, we knew there was all the American stuff. We never knew there would have been an Australian investigation. And basically from there, it was a case of placing the maps with Gary. You know, I was the lucky one. I got to sit at home late last year and, you know, basically just wait for these guys to return and find out if they did or didn't achieve it. But yeah, a magnificent effort to the 3 blokes that are here today that actually uncovered the crash site. So yeah, tragic event, and unfortunately for pretty well 70 years, it's not been covered up, but at the time there was definitely a cover up. But I think it's something that we need to get out there and publicise and you know, basically give these men a name. So, thanks, Gary.
Matt just briefly mentioned the very grim task of recovering the men from this wreckage. If I can just read an account by Lieutenant Charles Reid, who was an officer with the 2nd 12th Battalion, which was in fact the 18th Brigade. He stated, on the morning of 7th September, I was on the scene of the aircraft accident and saw 2 bodies in the front of the leading truck facing towards the control room. It was the truck on its side. I knew Captain Ferguson, and on looking at one of these bodies, I saw from the shape of his head that it bore a strong resemblance to Captain Ferguson. To identify one of your friends in a scene such as that would have been, again, one of those things which sticks with anyone for the rest of their minds. For my generation, it's extremely difficult to get a sensation of what these men of 1943 went through. Again, you can only sit there yourselves and imagine. But in this modern day and age, we give it a fancy name like post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'd just like to acknowledge the fact that whilst these men are survivors of that accident, nobody survived who witnessed that, and they carried these ghosts for the rest of their lives. As Matt pointed out, there was 2 inquiries, of course, one by the United States Army Air Force and one by the AIF. The US official report considered the factors attributing to the crash were the result of 90% pilot error and 10% weather. Now, when you read the Foot Soldiers, there's numerous accounts which, from the perspective of men on the ground at Durrans, stated there was a mist beginning to form. Now, Durrans marshalling yard is 25 feet, roughly, lower than the airfield. So we're talking low ground. I explained earlier on and showed a photograph that there was a creek line running in between Durrans and the end of the airstrip. And for anyone who's lived on the land, when you have that dawn and the first coming of light, generally moisture or parts of the earth which are covered in water emit a mist or a fog. However, the 2nd 33rd members who were at the end of the airstrip, so they were up on the same level as the airstrip, did not report any mist at all. I don't know if any of the veterans here have any memories of the conditions. Most of them were dozing at that particular time, 4:20 in the morning, bearing in mind they had gotten up very early the day before, expecting to airlift out on the 6th of September. So again, it would have been one of those times when sleep was very scarce. In fact, I think that's the lot of every soldier, a lack of sleep and not enough food, I've been told, which is certainly not my problem. Interestingly, the Australian Court of Inquiry also made a determination. They indicated there was no evidence of any neglect on the part of the pilot. The accident took place in the pre-dawn darkness. However, witnesses on the higher ground, as indicated, said that the weather was clear. In lieu of the darkness, the pilot, by the name of Wood, undertook the takeoff under instrument conditions. The US report states that he failed to climb to a sufficient height before lowering the nose of the aircraft to increase speed. The report states, and I quote, "Going directly from contact to instrument flying in a B-24 aircraft immediately after takeoff is trying on the best of pilots. For flight instruments can give a very erratic reading the moment the aircraft becomes airborne." Lieutenant Colonel Harry J. Hawthorne, US Army Air Corps, he was the commander of the 403rd Bomb Group, stated that an aircraft should have no difficulty in making the necessary height with the length of runway available. Now, again, bear in mind that I indicated that the airfield of which they took off from was the fighter strip and not the bomber strip. However, again, the officer was of the opinion that the airfield was long enough for that particular aircraft. In fact, just a few moments before, another B-24 on a separate mission had taken off successfully. And a conversation with Snowy 2 nights ago indicated that numerous aircraft had taken off and landed in that particular area without any mishap. Prior to the aircraft colliding with the trees, a number of witnesses indicate seeing flames emitting from the port engine. Lieutenant Colonel Hawthorne made comment regarding this report. He indicated that in normal circumstances, flames frequently emerge from the supercharger of an engine. Now, bear in mind, this is early morning, it's dawn and the sun is yet to come up, so of course these flames from the supercharger would be quite evident. Subsequently, the US report discounted engine failure. As previously stated, Lieutenant Colonel Hawthorne had described Flight Officer Wood as an experienced pilot with 420 hours in B-24 Liberators. However, modern aviation experts have expressed to me that the pilot needs at least 1,000 hours in aircraft type before he truly knows his plane. There was a suggestion in Bill Crook's excellent book, The Foot Soldiers, at the time that suggested that Mexican saboteurs may have been the ones who caused the accident. This allegedly led to a system or an unofficial lottery where the aircrew were forced to draw straws and the loser would have to go on that next bombing mission of the aircraft of which he just serviced. So having said that, I don't believe that continued, and it's firmly believed now that there was no act of sabotage at all. The truth is, and this is reflected by the Australian report, is that we may never know the cause of the accident. In terms of the aircraft, a 4-engine bomber can easily fly on 3 engines. In fact, there's many accounts of the 8th Air Force who operate in Europe flying on 2 engines which have been put out of action by enemy fire. However, it's virtually impossible for a 4-engine aircraft with 2,800 gallons of fuel and 4 bombs on board to lift off. Whilst there is absolutely no evidence to suggest this, it is highly likely that if one engine did fail on takeoff, people on the ground, and in fact troops on the ground at Durran's airstrip, would hear the roar of 3 engines. So whilst I'm not saying to you that a 4th engine actually failed on the aircraft, it is possible that perhaps a 4 engine did in fact not give 100% power, and this could have been a factor. The fact of the matter is, in 1943, the onus at this particular time was to lift an entire division. It was the first time an entire Australian division had been airlifted from one point to another. Of course, the emphasis on the day is to get as many troops on the ground as they possibly can to land at Nadzab, which had been taken previously by American forces, as well as support by the 2nd 4th Field Regiment, which was an Australian artillery unit. So there wasn't a great deal of time and effort, I believe, put into the findings of this court matter. When you compare the accident of 1943 and the manner in which they investigate that accident to the manner in which modern police conduct investigations using forensic and scientific evidence. Again, I would suggest that perhaps if the same incident happened in modern day, we would probably have an answer, or at least several plausible answers to what caused the actual accident.
Gary?
Yes?
I'd just like to mention, my observation was that the plane never looked like leaving the ground. It was just coming, the lights were coming at you, it was roaring, and it just went straight to the top of the trees and straight into the trucks. So it actually never lifted off the ground, in my view. Thank you.
Okay, indeed.
Gary, Captain Ferguson was a lieutenant in England and was my platoon commander. Jack Balfour Ogilvie was in 9 platoon and we were in 8 platoon, so there was friendly rivalry, shall we say. But Fergie was a great officer, and I was very sorry to see he was killed.
What is known is this. At the time of the crash, there was not the slightest degree of panic, and everyone who was able to do so did what they could to assist the injured. Considerable presence of mind and initiative on the part of the members present no doubt contributed largely to the minimising of injuries and the saving of lives. That little quotation is from the official Australian report. Now, bear in mind, there was 62 Australians who lost their lives, as with the American aircrew consisting of 11, but there was over 90 men injured. Many of these men were injured, and indeed some of the men who lost their lives going into the flames or attempting to put the flames out of the men who, of course, had been affected by the crash. So it wasn't simply a matter of these men being in trucks and the whole lot being wiped out in one swoop by a crashing aircraft. The presence of mind by many of the men there to put their own lives in danger to save the lives of others was one thing which stuck out and was made mention of in the Australian report. And some of these men are the men you see before you today. This image here is a modern image of Bomana War Cemetery, where many of the men were laid to rest. Very shortly we're going to commence our poppy laying component of the service. At this point in time, is there anyone here who may wish to have 5 minutes break to go to the bathroom? We can certainly wait for you if that's the case. Is everyone here right to go? Yeah. All right, folks, having said that, I'm going to ask Jeffrey Watkins to come forward. What we have from this point on is the honour roll of the men who lost their lives on the 7th of September 1943. As instructed, if at any time any of the veterans here see a name which they may wish to lay a poppy for, simply please raise your hands and we'll facilitate that. Folks, today what's going to happen is certain people from the audience are going to come forward and lay poppies, and they've already been nominated to do so. They're going to lay the poppies into a wreath which we have here to the front on a table, and the wreath is in the shape of a colour patch. That colour patch, as you see before you, is brown over red, commonly referred to by the troops as mud over blood. The first person who we're going to commemorate today, and of course the names will be read out in alphabetical order, is VX 78975 Roy Frank Bird. The next man, SX 2159 Alec Leslie Breakwell. Alec Breakwell was the son of Frederick William and Edith Emily Breakwell of Broken Hill, New South Wales. He was 20 years of age. NX 80121, Frederick Russell Bressington. Frederick was the son of Percy Samuel Bird Bressington and Catherine Ellen Bressington of Sydney, New South Wales. He was the husband of Nancy Florence Bressington of North Sydney. He was 30 years of age. He's one of the men in this photograph. And that person there, we believe, is Frederick Russell Bressington. NX 31802, Edwin William Caife. Edwin Caife was the son of Albert and Alice May Caife. He was the husband of Ellen Millicent Caife of Alexandria, New South Wales. He was 28 years of age. The poppy today is being laid by his son. This slide here is a telegram which was sent to the family of Edwin Caife. It is dated up here in the corner, 12th of September 1943. Just to reiterate, the accident takes place on the 7th of September. So this is now 5 days later. The telegram states, if you can't read it up the back there, that Private Caife is dangerously ill. This next telegram arrived to the family on the 22nd of September 1943. It states, Private Caife, condition unchanged. I have to inform you that the NX 31802 Private Edwin William Caife is now reported condition unchanged. The tragic part of this is he'd actually passed away 3 days before that. This telegram, which was received on the 24th of September, indicates to the family that he lost his life. So it's one of those things which is another tragedy. When you compare it to a modern day scenario where we have troops now fighting in Afghanistan, it's not uncommon for them to be in touch with their loved ones on the same day via electronic communications. And I ask you to spare a thought for those who were left at home, who were waiting for news of any type of result as a result of the accident. Many of the families didn't get any news of this accident until such time as many veterans came home.
Gary, a word about Ed Caife. Bill Crooks in the Foot Soldiers records how there was Don companies in the first few days in the Kokoda campaign were called upon to provide a fighting patrol with multiple duties. They wanted 6 volunteers, and the company that Ed joined in that fighting patrol indicates that he was a mighty soldier himself, because that, from memory, I think it was Jock Proudfoot, and these names will mean something to my colleagues here. Jock Proudfoot, Irish Mullally, I think they were two of, these were real fighting men who would volunteer for anything, and Ed Caife was obviously one of those two.
For anyone who's lived through that era, the telegrams were delivered by a young boy I'm instructed on a bicycle who came from the General Post Office. Of course, we all have the vision in our minds of either the local priest or a telegram boy coming to the houses. Of course, most of us here are too young to know that type of a scenario. But as you can imagine, the telegrams arriving at the doorstep were ones of dread, and it was just a horrible time for your family, and I extend my sincere sympathy to your family. NX 32179, Leslie John Cook. He was the son of Samuel and Alice Louisa Cook, husband of Mona Kathleen Cook of Concord West, New South Wales. He was 25 years of age. NX 99208, Mannix Bede Daniel. Mannix was the son of Arthur Pierre and Elsie Magdalene Daniel of Mudgee, New South Wales. He was 24 years of age. NX 2755, Arnold William Darling. Arnold was the son of Charles Robert and Charlotte Darling, husband of Eileen Mary Darling of New South Wales. He was 31 years of age. NX 80187, Rex Lamington Davenport. He was the son of Leslie George and Doris Irene Davenport of Wallara, New South Wales. He was 20 years of age. We believe Rex Davenport to be this gentleman here. SX 17902, Ronald Donald. He was 24 years of age. In explanation, you'll notice with regards to these service numbers, they are prefixed by 2 letters. In this instance, it's SX. For those who aren't aware, the S indicates South Australia. So when you see the number NX, of course, that's New South Wales, VX is Victoria. VX 11997, John Boyd Ferguson. John Ferguson was the son of John Ferguson and Mary Ferguson, husband of Jean Elsie Ferguson of Perth, Western Australia. He was 28 years of age. When we decided to hold this commemoration, the men of the 2nd 33rd Battalion were asked to select one of the fallen, whose name will be read out this afternoon at 5 p.m. at our official closing ceremony. Of the men there, they chose John Boyd Ferguson, who of course was the captain, the commander of Don Company at that particular time. As a point of interest, John Boyd Ferguson's only sister, Helen, was to marry a man by the name of Edward Weary Dunlop after the Second World War. VX 87009, Walter William Fielder. Walter was the son of Walter and Alice Dale Fielder. He was the husband of Jessie Elizabeth Fielder of West Brunswick in Victoria. Walter was 38 years of age. NX 89776, Alan Wesley Gambrel. Alan was the son of Wesley Charles and Clara Muriel Gambrel of Windsor, New South Wales. He was 21 years of age. When the Australian War Memorial was first conceived in 1916 on the Western Front, it was the original intent of Charles Bean, who was our official historian, to have on the wall of a building the face of every man, a photograph or an image of every soldier, sailor and airman who lost his life during the Great War. For those of you who have gone up to our commemorative area, you'll notice that on that wall to represent the First World War is over 60,000 names. Unfortunately, in 1916, when the idea was conceived, there was no idea that the war would go on to 1918, and of course the loss of life be so great. So as a result of that, names only were recorded and not photographs. It's been the aim of the Australian War Memorial for many years to try and obtain a photograph of each and every man, regardless of the conflict, to retain for our records. So, as I mentioned before with regards to photographs, we urge that you get the word out to other 2nd, 33rd descendants. Many of these names that we have here today, we don't have photographs for, or individual photos. So of course, it's something that we are collecting as an ongoing project. And again, I ask you just to make it known that we are trying to seek photographs of each and every man and woman, I should say, who lost their lives. SX 28936, David James Harvey. David was the son of William John and Ethel May Harvey of Wilmington, South Australia. He was 21 years of age. NX 36851, John Thomas Hickey. John was the son of Thomas White Hickey and Mary Elizabeth Hickey of Arncliffe, New South Wales. He was 19 years of age. Of course, these images here have taken from the wall that we have upstairs in the commemorative area. At 2 p.m. today, we will have an official wreath-laying ceremony, and after that, I would invite everybody to join us up on the wall where the 2nd, 33rd have their list of fallen, and of course, we'll view these names. VX 80414, Huey Hinwood. Huey was the son of Richard and Rose Hinwood of Melbourne, Victoria. He was 22 years of age. NX 58770, Edward Lawrence Bernard Hughes. Edward was the son of Leonard Lawrence and Ellen Hughes of Marrickville, New South Wales. He was the husband of Patricia May Hughes of Marrickville. He was 31 years of age. NX 154265, Victor William Kerins. You may notice up in the top left-hand corner a colour patch, and that is the colour patch of the 158 General Transport Company. There was 2 men from this company who lost their lives amongst the 62. NX 37163, Malcolm Vincent Keys. Malcolm was the son of Charles Vincent and Ellen Gertrude Keys of Narrabri, New South Wales. He was 28 years of age. SX 17755, Frederick Walter Lewis. Frederick was the son of Percival Frederick and Amelia Lewis, husband of Doreen Elsie Lewis of Aldgate, South Australia. He was 36 years of age. SX 18013, Jack Nain Ling. Jack was the son of George and Violet Emma Ling of Hobart, Tasmania. He was 22 years of age. SX 18963, Arthur Charles Long. Arthur was the son of Ormond George and Florence Alice Long, husband of Gladys Beatrice Long of Woodville North, South Australia. He was 30 years of age. NX 95991, Clive MacDonald. Clive was the son of Percival and Hester MacDonald of Mandarin, New South Wales. He was 29 years of age. VX 113110, Francis Edward McFadden. Francis was the son of David and Annie Elizabeth McFadden of East Prahran, Victoria. He was 20 years of age. NX 91436, Maxwell McGarvey. Maxwell was the son of Patrick McGarvey of Goulburn, New South Wales. He was 26 years of age. QX 32523, Dugald McGregor. Dugald was the son of Archibald and Annie McGregor. He was 39 years of age. QX 7355, John McGrow. John was the son of James Montgomery McGrow and Blanche Anne McGrow of Alderley in Queensland. He was 21 years of age. VX 122632, Othel Keith McLeod. Othel was the son of Alexander and Elizabeth Margaret McLeod of Oakley in Victoria. He was 33 years of age. DX21, Joseph Mackerel. You'll notice there he has the prefix of D, which indicates he was from the Northern Territory, or he enlisted in the Northern Territory at Darwin. You can also note he has a very low number of 21. Of course, this photo here is of Joseph Mackerel on the 6th of September 1943. Taken on the day when, of course, General Blamey visited the group. Can I just ask, gentlemen, can anyone here recall that day when Blamey visited the troops? Was anyone here present? Yeah. Would you mind saying a few words?
The interesting thing to me, we were all lined up, and our CO was, Tom Cotton, was performing the inspection with General Blamey, but unfortunately something had happened earlier which antagonised a lot of the troops, in that somehow, according to what is said in the foot soldiers, that General Blamey had said to the troops when he was inspecting them after they came out of the Kokoda track, that rabbits run. And this was the 21st Brigade people, and I think it was the 27th Battalion. And our troops, once again, mates look after mates, and they weren't happy about it. So it went through the ranks, a boo to General Blamey. But what happened later, what he had said was misconstrued, apparently, and that wasn't meant, but our troops were quick to take it up and say, you don't say that to troops in the front line, and that was one of the things that happened.
Actually, this would sound a little bit counter to what Ray has just said about Blamey, because the CO of the 39th Battalion, who was one of those I use the term abused by Blamey after the Kokoda campaign. That was Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Honour, wrote that up himself, and many of us have read exactly what he said, and he records exactly what Blamey said, and Blamey's attitude was one to be absolutely abhorred. He did suggest that he told the troops that it was the man with the gun, not the rabbits, that ran, words to that effect. And there was every reason for troops to be antagonistic to Blamey. He just wasn't worth the paper he was written on.
This photograph here was taken in October last year, and again it's Bomana War Cemetery, which we showed the image before. All of the men who lost their lives on that day, apart from the Americans, are buried there, or their names are recorded on the monument at the head of Bomana War Cemetery. SX 18051, Claude James Mildwaters. Claude was the son of Albert James Mildwaters and Florence Beatrice Mildwaters, husband of Amy Violet Myrtle Mildwaters of Mitcham, South Australia. He was 29 years of age. SX 17640, Keith Alexander Gladstone Miller. Keith was the son of James Henry and Janet Elizabeth Miller of South Australia. He was 21 years of age. NX 95896, Alfred Colin Myers. Alfred was the son of Richard and Alice Myers, husband of Ruby Mary Myers of Eltham, New South Wales. He was 32 years of age. QX 33350, John Andrew Nixon. John was the son of M.A. Nixon of St. George, Queensland. He was 22 years of age. NX 46658, Frederick Timothy O'Regan. He was the son of Timothy John and Nina O'Regan of Lismore, New South Wales. He was 27 years of age. NX 8932, Rupert William Maitland Pearson. Rupert was the son of Arthur Gordon and Violet May Pearson of Narrandera, New South Wales. He was 32 years of age. NX 96055, Hartley Roy Preston. Hartley Preston was the son of Thomas Richard and Dora Emily Preston. He was born in Cobargo, New South Wales, and his name is recorded on the War Memorial at Badalla on the south coast of New South Wales. NX 88065, James Desmond Quinn. James was the son of Albert George and Florence Quinn of Leichhardt, New South Wales. He was 20 years of age. These images, which appear like this, are extracted from the service record of the individual soldiers. The unfortunate thing is, not every man who served had his photo taken, and I don't know why. However, some of these photos here which appear again are the only photos we have of that particular man. SX27897, Robert Michael Reid. Robert was the son of Michael Albert and Edith May Reid of Broken Hill, New South Wales. He was 23 years of age. QX1585, Jack Richard Reinke. He was the son of John Carl and Agnes Reinke. He was 26 years of age. NX81833, Hilary Joseph Rice. Hilary was the son of John Joseph and Margaret B. Rice of Cremorne, New South Wales. He was 30 years of age. VX90974, John Robert Richardson. John was the son of Oscar Ernest and Catherine A. Richardson of Geelong in Victoria. He was 23 years of age. NX69750, Philip Roberts. Philip was the son of James and Catherine Ann Roberts. He was 33 years of age. QX34862, Roy Alexander Shields. Roy was the son of John Alexander and Blanche Shields, husband of Flora Vida Shields of Valley, Queensland. He was 33 years of age. QX3124, George Charles Simmons. George was the son of William and Martha Simmons of Bundaberg, Queensland. He was 30 years of age. NX37382, Basil Henry Slade. Basil was the son of Henry Charles and Susan Slade, husband to Jean Gladys Slade of Lismore, New South Wales. He was 21 years of age. Just instantly, that's Basil there in the middle. NX39846, Edward Joseph Smalley. Edward was the son of Edward Joseph and Hannah May Smalley of Mortdale, New South Wales. He was 28 years of age. NX141881, Cecil Harold Bede Smith. Cecil was the son of William and Matilda Smith of Wellington, New South Wales. He was 20 years of age. QX3854, Francis Ronald Smith. Francis was the son of Francis Corsten Smith and Kathleen Mary Smith of Innisfail, Queensland. He was 25 years of age. NX97042, William Smith. William was 40 years of age. VX8615, Stanley Arthur Snow. Stanley was the son of Harry and Elizabeth Eleanor Snow. He He was 32 years of age. NX 50797, John Sidney Spear. John was the son of Sydney and Ivy Florence Spear of Sanssouci, New South Wales. He was 23 years of age. NX 50334, Bruce Stanton. Bruce was the son of Florence Piggott of Cronulla, New South Wales. He was 21 years of age. This image here shows his resting place at Bomana War Cemetery. Thank you.
Hang on, we're going to sleep.
Yeah, just stay there. We can bring the wreath to you, sir. We can bring the wreath to you. DX 116, Arthur William Stew. Arthur was the son of Albert William and Mary Ann Stew. He was the husband of Yana Stew of Balaclava, South Australia. He was 36 years of age. SX 18977, David Victor Swift. David Swift was the son of Victor Octavius Swift and Eileen Linda Louisa Swift of Woodville Park, South Australia. He was 20 years of age. NX 154261, Joseph Vincent Taranto. Joseph was the son of Jack and Josephine Taranto of Campsie in New South Wales. He was 21 years of age. Again, he was one of the drivers from the 158 General Transport Company that lost his life on that particular day. NX 37094, John Charles Thompson. John was the son of John Samuel and Ellen Eileen Thompson of Brightonley Sands in New South Wales. He was 23 years of age. WX 13761, Charles Leonard Ward. Charles was the son of Harry and Mabel Ward of Barlingup, Western Australia. He was 28 years of age. NX 47747, Reginald Ward. He was the son of Frederick, Ernest and Amy Ada Ward of Kinchila Creek in New South Wales. He was 23 years of age. NX 147563, Charles James Webster. Charles was the son of Arthur Sidney Lyndon Webster and Margaret Webster of Hillston, New South Wales. He was the husband of Agnes Ray Webster of Hillston, New South Wales, and he was 26 years of age. NX 15257, Frederick Frank Weston. He was the son of William and Pearl Weston, husband of Gloria Joan Weston of Kingsford, New South Wales. He was 32 years of age. NX 97110, Ivan Ernest Whittle. Ivan was the son of John Woods Whittle and Emily Margaret Whittle of Glebe Point, New South Wales. His father, John Woods Whittle, had been awarded the Victoria Cross and DCM, or Distinguished Conduct Medal, during the First World War. VX 77454, Joseph Wilson. Joseph was the son of Edward and Catherine Wilson of Sunshine, Victoria. He was 36 years of age. NX 18491, Robert John Workman. Robert was the son of John and Frances Workman of Ballina, New South Wales. He was 22 years of age. I'd now like to invite Major Keith Quake Cowell, United States Air Force, to come forward and recite the names of the 11 men who lost their lives as aircrew of B-24D Liberator, Pride of the Cornhuskers.
Howard J. Wood, from Lincoln County, Nebraska. Howard R. Thomas, from Chemung County, New York. Ralph M. Hart, from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Robert G. McDonald, from Brewster, Polk County, Florida. John Reinach, from Adams County, Pennsylvania. Charles P. Sipe, from Pennsylvania. Hyman Silverstein, from Norfolk County, Massachusetts. Joel L. Herndon, from Georgia. Donald F. Wilcott, from Illinois. Samuel M. Wilkinson, from Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania. And Samuel B. White.
Stand for the ode.
I'll ask you now to all be upstanding as Snowy King recites the ode.
Their glory will never die. The whole wide world is their sepulchre. They shall grow not old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them. Lest we forget.
Okay, everyone please be seated. Folks, before we have a moment here for questions for the veterans, Ray Gibson has asked to come forward and lay a poppy on our wreath on behalf of the 2nd 33rd Battalion Association. Okay, folks, we have the opportunity now to, if you have any questions to ask of any of our veterans here present, or if there's anyone here who would like to say a few words at all, now is the moment to do so. I have my colleagues, Patrick here on my right and Craig over here on my left. So simply, if you just have a show of hands, everyone who wishes to ask a question, and we'll facilitate having the mic brought up to you. Just up the back there, please, Craig.
But I just wanted to say I'm so glad that Ron was in the marshalling yards when those poor fellows died. We have 9 beans with us here today, and so I thank the Lord for that.
Sorry, ma'am, just the name again?
Ron and Evelyn Bean.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Actually, I have one question to start us off, please, gentlemen, if we can. The decision to continue on with the attack, the airlift from 7 Mile Strip or Durran Strip up to Ley, how did that affect the battalion in terms of you've just suffered a major traumatic incident? Do you feel that was the right decision to be made to send you men straight into battle after such an incident?
Well, it could not have been otherwise. There was an operation that had been planned, and we were short one single company. I suppose that would be the way that our superiors would look at it, especially people like General Blamey. And so it went ahead without any question. From us, we couldn't see that any reason why it should not.
Just additional something to say. As far as I was concerned, we were as a battalion supporting our other battalions who were going into action against these Japanese. But the thing that always hit me after that accident was thinking of those poor blokes who'd been incinerated in such a terrible flame. And also, I'd like to make this mention that many of our young chaps who were involved in that accident but weren't killed or wounded or anything went into action against the Japanese and were killed later. So I think we have to keep in mind the different people who were lost. Thanks, Gary.
Is there any more questions from the audience? Just over here, please, Craig.
This is not a question, it's just a little piece from something I found. My name's Felicity Hickman. My father, Max, was in the battalion. And this is from, well, it's called the Syrian anniversary number of the Griffin, which was published in 1944. And this is from the piece that Lieutenant Colonel Cotton wrote in that edition, and he said, in a list of things that he said he was most thankful for, one was the way that the battalion recovered after the dreadful setback of the air smash. At a time when weak units might have collapsed, the steel of the battalion was true to its tempering, enabling the winning of fresh laurels.
Thank you. Just up the back there, please.
While he's going up there, I'd just like to say this about our CO, Tom Cotton, who took over from Colonel Buttrose, but he was one of the originals of the battalion who went up through the ranks and ended up being CO of our battalion. And one of the things he was very proud of was the football team.
We might mention that very shortly, I believe. Just up the back, please, ma'am.
Yeah, I've just got a two-part thing. Firstly, are the men that lost their lives still listed as accidentally killed?
To my knowledge, yes, they are listed as accidentally killed. However, I do note on some recordings it's listed as died on active service, which perhaps may be more appropriate. Bear in mind, these men were completely kitted up. They, in a matter of days, would be in action fighting for lay. Of course, they were prepared and about to go into battle. So it's perhaps something which some of you feel very strongly about in terms of the listing or recording of their deaths. Perhaps to say to die in accident is not telling the full story.
Yeah, I contacted my federal member because I was quite concerned about this, hoping that they were still listed as accidentally killed. She made representation to the Minister for Veteran Affairs. He said there are certain listings and that's why they need to be listed as accidentally killed. So I've now asked her to contact the Minister for Defence and have it changed to killed in a war zone or killed in service, because I think if a soldier goes overseas and is killed, you know, serving their country, I think it needs to be changed, and hopefully I was wanting it done by today, but it hasn't happened, so.
I've no doubt many share that opinion, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
You must have noticed that there was a tombstone of one of the aircrew, the US aircrew, that said, "Killed in action." And I very much feel that those airmen deserve to be called killed in action and not accidentally. And the same thing applies to the fellows of the 2nd, 33rd, who were there to fight, who were on their way to fight, but whose lives were cut short by that disaster.
Just to put things into perspective, folks, the 2nd 33rd Battalion enters the Kokoda Trail in September of 1942, and then they fight on towards late November when they ended up in Gona. From Iribiwa through to Gona, they suffered 48 men killed in action or died of disease or wounds. There were 62 men killed in this incident. It's the greatest loss of life suffered by this battalion in one particular incident. It's also the worst disaster in Australian history involving an aircraft. However, very little is known about it. There was a crash in June of 1942 in North Queensland where a B-17 being used as a transport aircraft came down and 40 lost their lives in that particular incident. But it just goes to show, I've always considered, when you think of the term the Silent Seventh, in explanation, the 7th Division was known by that nickname due to the reason being they were in Syria and Lebanon fighting the Vichy French, whilst other divisions were fighting the Germans. It wasn't good news to report Australians engaged and killing Frenchmen, despite the fact they were liaised with the enemy, for the simple reason being the Free French were on our side and fighting for the British. So that is why the 7th Division wasn't reported in the newspapers, and they largely became known as the Silent Seventh. As my own personal opinion, the 25th Brigade, which again consists of the 2nd 25th, 2nd 31st, 2nd 33rd, are the silent of the Silent Seventh. Having walked the Kokoda Trail a number of times, it distresses me to think that sometimes the story of that whole brigade is not being told as strongly as it should. You should never favour one group over another. However, I've been standing on a place called Bamboo Ridge, which is also known as Myola Ridge. It was the first engagement or major engagement where the 2nd 33rd went into attacking mode. Bearing in mind at Iribiwa they were largely defensive and then were asked to pull back. I've seen groups walk past Myola Ridge without uttering a word, And I think that's largely due to ignorance. People simply just don't know. So it's essential that we learn these stories and pass that on to future generations, because, as I said, the 25th Brigade is one of those brigades which is not largely spoken about when tour groups tour the Kokoda Trail. I don't wish to embarrass young Matthew Cafes. Matthew, I think you believe he walked the trail this year, is that correct?
That's right, in June.
In June, okay. So having said that, it's nice to know that many descendants are to this day taking up the task, self-appointed task of walking the trail in memory of their ancestors. I've just got... You please do.
Just going to say, I totally agree with Gary there. Like I was saying before, with my own research on my grandfather and trying to investigate about the 2nd 33rd, if it wasn't for primarily the foot soldiers, I had nothing to work from. Just to give you a bit of an example, his father, my great-grandfather, also fought in the Boer War and then World War I, and he was also South African Constabulary over in South Africa. Now, I can actually find a hell of a lot more on his father, my great-grandfather, than I can on Jack with the 2nd 33rd. And that's quite unfortunate, and I think that's probably where this accident, I don't know, it was basically like a fuse for me. I needed to find out more, and that's where we got in contact, and I guess, to answer the KIA question, I know that the 11 US definitely are recorded as killed in action. And that's come directly from the descendants. Unfortunately, like Gary was saying, depending on the resources that you look for Australia, a lot of it's recorded as accidental death. Gary sort of touched on it before, but apparently word came down from General MacArthur that they didn't want the morale of the troops diminishing through hearing about this accident. So at the time, we've actually got a war correspondence report that was written at the time of the accident, and it was actually blacked out. It was never published. So I think the main thing from my point of view was I wanted to do a lot of research, hold these sort of events. We still want to lay a plaque in Papua New Guinea in memory of the men, but I think it's about getting the knowledge and the education out to the people first, and then we can obviously look at the correct terminology after that. But there's still a large number of Australians that don't know anything about this accident.
This seems to be an appropriate time for us to thank Matt Sloan and Gary Traynor for the work they've done to bring about this commemoration. Thank you, both of you.
Thanks, Darren. Thank you, folks. The plaque that you see here on the screen now is actually just outside the building. If you were to exit the glass doors, which most of you entered, and then go to your left, that plaque is actually laid on the grounds, as are many battalion and other association plaques. As I mentioned to you before, about 18 months ago, Matthew approached me with the concept of doing something about this incident. We still, as Matthew indicated, would like to lay a plaque in Papua New Guinea, and we hope to do that on the 7th of September next year. There has been a number of families and descendants of veterans who have indicated their willingness to attend or travel to Port Moresby next year to be there when we lay a plaque. And we are hoping that this is something that the association will carry forward, because I feel it's a very significant part of our history which needs to be commemorated, and I've got no doubt that you all here agree. Of course, Jeffrey Watkins was saying he would like to walk the Kokoda Trail again. Well, I carried him the first time. So maybe he might consider walking on his own 2 feet next time. So again, ladies and gentlemen, I ask that if anyone here is interested in attending New Guinea next year to lay a plaque, to remain in touch with myself and Yvonne Unit or Matt, and perhaps we might be able to get that project underway. It's going to involve quite a fair bit of red tape in terms of laying a plaque near the crash site. I can explain to you now that the crash site itself is remote, and nobody will ever go there unless tour leaders, and I know there's a number of people here today who conduct tours over the Kokoda Trail. We need to take trekkers to this location and explain the story. of what actually happened. So I think it would be prudent if we laid the plaque, if possible, on the wall of the airport, an external wall perhaps, where it can be oversighted and protected by security who man the airport 24 hours a day. But again, I certainly hope that is something that the veterans may support for us in the future. I'd just like to close with this image here. As you know, it's Legacy Week. Here I have the clipping of a young man by the name of Ernest James Caife, who was 2 years old when he lost his father. This clipping shows a 9-year-old Ernest proudly wearing his father's medals at the Cenotaph in Sydney. So as you know, unfortunately, the legacy for our diggers continues. I would like to say that there's no more names to be placed on the wall upstairs in the commemorative area. Unfortunately, that list continues to grow. But when I think of something like this, and when I read a letter written by young Ernest, it broke my heart. He never knew his father, but he missed him every day of his life. The letter went on to say that he used to cry himself to sleep, and he just, even though he knew his father had passed, he just wished for the day that his father would come and knock on the door and have the door open and him say, "Hello, son, I'm home." But unfortunately, that day never happened. And it happens for so many other young Australians, which is why this week, especially being Legacy Week, we need to remember that legacy. I'm sorry to say that that Ernest is not the only one here who was quite young when their father tragically died in this accident. I know there is people within this audience now who are descendants of the men whose names we've just read out. So again, to me, it's very significant that that we remember that the legacy continues and will continue as long as Australians wear a uniform. And I'm very proud to see two men, one from each side of the Pacific, wearing their uniform today, because I think it's a very noble thing to serve your country. So well done. I have two colleagues here from MH&T, which is the Military Heraldry and Technology section where I work. I won't steal too much of their thunder because I know they're going to talk about the objects they've brought in. But it's the task of our office on behalf of the Australian War Memorial to take in objects for our national collection. More importantly, to conserve, protect and hopefully display these objects to all Australians, to explain the service we have had of our servicemen in the past and the servicemen we now have in the present. I will just announce that recently we had the Afghanistan exhibition open, and for those who haven't seen it, I urge you to go forward and have a look at that sometime today. But I might just call forward Miss Tamsin Hong. Ray mentioned a football match in particular, and I'm going to pass the microphone to these gentlemen a little bit later on, but I would invite Tamsin to come forward and explain a little bit about one of the objects she's brought here today to show you. Thank you, Tamsin.
Thanks, Gary. Now, you'll be able to identify that Ashley Wadman and myself are curators because of our very attractive blue gloves, which we wear whenever we're handling one of our 91,000 objects that we have in the Military Heraldry and Technology section of the Australian War Memorial. And what I've got for you today is, if you have a chance, please do come down and have a look at one of the shields that we've got, which is actually the trophy that you'll see in this photograph here. Was anyone in Company D here, by any chance? Well, this shows Company D proudly winning the trophy in 1946. And we don't know a great deal about this particular trophy. We know that it was donated to the War Memorial by the 2nd 33rd Battalion. And we know that rugby league was clearly an important part of the battalion's culture. So this particular trophy is specifically for rugby league, and this is the team that would have won it in this particular year. But it was also won in previous years by Headquarters and by B Company in 1945. On the trophy itself, it's got a Rising Sun badge, and the larger part, yeah, just below the Rising Sun badge. Thanks, Gary. That's a nifty trick. You can see a really beautiful little engraving of a guy who's just about to kick the winning goal. And so just by having this particular trophy, we have already been able to establish a bit about the 2nd 33rd Battalion. And these sorts of objects are really valuable for us because we've had exhibitions such as the Sport and War exhibition, where these sorts of objects are put on display, and they tell us a lot about the importance of sport to particular battalions. And one of the reasons why that particular exhibition was held was because there are a lot of similar qualities between what we value in warfare and what we value in sports, such as courage, teamwork, leadership, physical prowess, mateship and loyalty. And so this shield shows us a bit about that for the 2nd 33rd Battalion. And I might invite Ashley to come up and tell us about the medal she brought in.
I can't see Sparrow there, he played with
Just incidentally, before the troops emplaced on the 7th September 1943, my understanding is that the 2nd 33rd Battalion played the 2nd 25th Battalion in a game of rugby league and beat them 13 points to 10. Can anyone remember that one?
I can't identify who that is actually, but I can tell you that in 1944, B Company won the Cotton Shield, it was called. It was given by the CO, of course. And then the battalion team went on to win the 7th Div Comp, and then they played the winners of the RAAF Comp. This is on the Athen Tablelands, and beat them too. So, but I think I just can't account for that in that they've got that team has the shield. It has to be another company. I can't recognise either a B Company face or a battalion team face. Sorry.
All I can say is that B Company seemed to get all the footballers that played in it because they seem to win. They seem to win all the football matches in the 2nd 33rd.
And also provided a fairly healthy part of the battalion team.
Oh, I won't have that.
I think you've started something, Sam.
When we were in England, we were playing, the battalion was playing ASC, I think it was, and we were getting thumped. But a lone plane came over and bombed us. And the slit trenches were up the other end of the field to what I was on, and I threw myself on the ground and hoped for the best. If there's a... What's the time? When Jeff Watkins was talking about England, and while I wasn't there, this is a kind of vicarious experience. The then Sergeant Major that Murray will well remember was Bob Roberts, known as Black Bob.
He was the RSM.
In fact, sorry, did I say? Yeah, the RSM, the Regimental Sergeant Major, was Bob Roberts. And Bob Roberts was as silver-tongued a gentleman as you will ever find. Not very many people would call him a gentleman, but he came across as that. I really didn't know Bob until after the war, when he was Secretary of the Australian Rugby Union and the New South Wales Rugby Union. And I saw a bit of him. And he loved telling stories about himself, and they were very, very believable stories. And this one was about when he'd committed some misdemeanour in England, and the CO asked him what he thought what he deserved for this misdemeanour. And he said, I will leave it, this is how Bob told the story, he said, I'll leave it to you, Sir Major. So Bob said he'd commit himself to 10 days CB, confined to barracks. About 2 days later, the CO ran into Bob up outside some pub or in some pub in town, and he said, "Oh, Sir Major, I didn't expect to find you here. I thought you were confined. You had confined yourself to barracks." And Silvertongue Bob said, "Well, sir, after a day and a half, I found my conduct to have been so exemplary that I decided to remit the rest of the sentence."
And sometimes at night you'd be drinking with Bob and be calling him Bob, and all of a sudden he'd say, "Sir Major to you, Sergeant." And you'd fall into line for a little while and then drop back to Bob.
So what happened, Murray, when you became an officer? Did that change?
He was also a lieutenant at the time.
Oh, okay.
So we were on even
Good when you
footing.
get promoted that way. Folks, next I'd like to introduce to you another colleague of mine, Ashley Wadman, who is going to speak about a set of medals which we have in our national collection, which pertain to Leslie John Cook. So I'd like you to welcome, please, Ashley Wadman.
So you can see on the table in front of you that we've got the medal group of medals that were awarded to Corporal Leslie John Cook for his service during the Second World War. Cook was born in Perth on the 11th of June 1918 to Samuel and Alice Louisa. He enlisted for service on 14 June 1940 in Marrickville in Sydney and was posted to 6th Battalion before joining the 2nd 33rd Battalion on the 3rd of February 1941. In July of 1943, he was promoted to corporal and only 2 months later died of the burns received during the crash on 7 September 1943. He was 25 years old, and he's now buried in the Port Moresby or Bomana War Cemetery. And for his service, Cook received the following campaign medals, which Tamsin's now showing around. From the left, they are the 1939-45 Star, which was awarded for Leslie's operational service during the Second World War. The Africa Star, which was awarded for his service in the Middle East in 1941 and 42. He was entitled to this medal due to his participation in the fierce fighting against the Vichy French in Syria and Lebanon. The Pacific Star was awarded for his service in Papua, including service on the Kokoda Track in 1942 and 1943. The Defence Medal was awarded for his non-operational service in Australia. The British War Medal, 1939-45, was awarded for his full-time service during the Second World War, and the Australia Service Medal was again awarded for his service during the Second World War. Now, this medal group came into the National Collection by way of a donation in 2006, and it was part of a mixed collection of items which included photographs, letters, colour patches and ribbons relating to his service. These items were accepted into the collection due to their strong historical significance. Through their relation to the service of Corporal Leslie John Cook, they assist the memorial to interpret not only Cook's personal experience, but the history of the 2nd 33rd Battalion and the wider involvement of Australia during the Second World War. The medal group was accessioned by the Military Heraldry and Technology section, while the other items I mentioned moved into different collecting areas. These medals are now safely housed in one of our storage areas so that they will be preserved for generations of Australians to appreciate. We are in the process of making as much of our collection available online as possible, as we can only display a limited number of items in our available museum space. But stored away does not mean locked away, and these medals, like many others, are available for viewing in person. And if any of you would like to view such items, you can do this by arranging an appointment with the curator in the Military Heraldry and Technology section. Thank you.
Okay, folks, it is now 1:05, and that concludes this part of our service today. I'd just like to point out again that at 2 p.m. in the commemorative area upstairs is the official wreath laying ceremony, where the official wreaths will be laid by the battalion members, and of course the wreath that we have here before us, in which you people have contributed to the building of that wreath, will also be laid. So you have about 55 minutes from this point on to go and have lunch or do what you need to do. There is lifts available just outside the door here for those who you wish to use the lift. Otherwise, folks, I thank you very much for your attention today. I understand and fully appreciate that this event took a substantial period of time, but the history books often mention this horrible accident where 73 men, Australian and American, lost their lives. Well, this morning we gave those men, those 62 Australians and 11 Americans, a name. And so from here, the only other place I'd like you to view those names, as I said, after the ceremony will be the commemorative area. And once the last wreath has been laid and the service is concluded, I'd ask you to join me up in the cloister, which holds the Second World War names, and of course we'll go and view the names of the 2nd 33rd Battalion. So, ladies and gents, I thank you so much for your attention, and again, I just hope that you will spread the word about this battalion, about this incident, so that it's never forgotten from this point on. All the best, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll see you at 2 p.m. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Very good.